There's a lot of confusion in the market about who's who are the best people, what list do you go to, who do you look at for information on who is the top 100, who is the top 10, who is the top 5, who is the best firm in a particular marketplace, and that creates some confusion. And because of that, it's very hard to get across what your USPs are and get across why you're better than any other company that's down the road from you. There's a lack of differentiation in terms of the service because whilst law firms, accountancy firms have different areas of specialism, in essence, they provide the same service. So actually having that differentiation, whether it's through brand or whether it's through the way you do business or the process that you use or the type of clients you work for, is harder to get across to people that are working in other businesses that might like to use your services. And success is hard to quantify. So because you don't have that end transaction point where you can say, I had 10,000 visits to my site and I got 1,000 purchases, or I made X amount of money, that success becomes hard to quantify because we have to look at it as 10,000 visits and a series of other things, whether that be a bounce rate and geographical locations and pages they looked at and time on site are the type of things that we end up having to use to track. So the management in these types of companies generally are quite focused on the core business activity. So in this case, very focused on what they're doing in terms of the legal profession. It's a fast-moving industry with a lot of change constantly evolving. And it's because of that, you have to focus very much on that day-to-day business activity. And so things like the digital marketing side of things, and marketing in general really, get left behind a certain amount. And they often don't see the value in the digital activity because they can't track it, because they're not got a figure to attribute to it, because it's just a series of page visits, and what does that really mean to them when they're dealing with their clients over here. So what Reading Room and Lewis Silkin set out to work on was what success should look like, what success is in terms of digital for a law firm, and then work on how we got to that. So we're going to talk you through that process. But first of all, I'm going to let Mark talk you through who Lewis Silkin are to give you a bit of a background.
Thanks, Sam. As I describe the firm, I'm going to use terms like human and employee engagement, which is going to sound like we're kind of sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya all day. It's really not like that. It is a commercial organisation. First of all, we're a commercial law firm, corporate law firm. We don't do kind of personal law. So we don't even have what is referred to as high net worth individual department. They used to be known as rich people when I was a kid. It's a corporate law firm with particular specialisms. For 5 years now, we've featured in the Sunday Times top 100 companies to work with, which is really important to us. It says a lot about our employee engagement. I could wax lyrical about the firm, as you'd expect, because I'm the BD director, but I'm not going to. The important thing for us around employee engagement, if I translate that into benefit for clients, is that we have a lower churn. Lower churn means retained people, means retained knowledge, and that knowledge goes towards client development and delivering effective client work. Established all the stats, 1952. We have 60 partners, over 300 staff, 3 locations in the UK. In terms of our global presence, we're members of 2 alliances, one of which is called EOS Laboris, which is a network of employment law specialists. The other one is the Global Advertising Lawyers Alliance. We've taken a slightly different approach to other law firms in that our networks are specialist networks. And I can go on and talk about that. So what are we known for? The main things that we're known for, and it's quite an eclectic mix, which is quite a challenge when you're trying to develop key messages and take those messages into the digital environment. The first thing we're known for is employment. We have probably the largest, if not the most successful employment practice amongst UK firms. It's huge. It has about 90 lawyers, about 24 partners. The other thing that we're known for is brand management. That's grown out of an advertising and marketing practice. We've been advising on advertising and marketing issues for about the last 60 years. But increasingly now, we're helping companies and agencies manage their brands. Now, the only thing I've written down is some client names because of client confidentiality. I have to get the ones right that are in the public domain. So we work with Aston Martin, 4 out of the 5 world's largest advertising groups, Lush, Reckitt Benckiser, Marks & Spencer's, the AA, and Sitecore Entertainment on all aspects of their brand management. We can advise on brand inception and establishment, protecting the brand, action against people infringing the brands, selling off of elements of a brand. We advise across that whole kind of spectrum. We do call ourselves a rather more human law firm. Lots of law firms will say they're human, they're about people. That's probably true to an extent, but we've got lots more touch points that we can prove that our people are different, our approach is different. We have and we had a strong brand, and pre the digital work that we started to do in about 2012, it was interesting what the guy from Wicked Web was saying about Wagamama. Our brand was very strong offline, but it wasn't as strong online. And the question was, what do we need to do about this? I'm part of the management team, the management board. Lots of people were saying, yeah, let's just get out there and build a website. And I said, actually, no, it's not just about a website these days, it's about a digital strategy. So we had a public-facing website. It was built on a SharePoint platform. It was far from satisfactory, shall we say. We had an intranet, an extranet. The website held our brand, but it wasn't really delivering on the brand values that we knew were out there in the marketplace. It wasn't very dynamic. It was difficult to update. Outside of the website, to be honest, the digital presence was poor. People were putting a toe in the water. We had partners tweeting. But generally, we needed to bring our presence online up to where we were offline. The competition were gaining ground on us, and particularly clients in the sector were starting to say, well, look, you're coming to talk to us about our social media strategy, how we use digital, what we should be doing in terms of our website from a legal perspective. We're not really seeing you walk the walk and talk the talk. You haven't got that digital presence. So, we had to do something about that. So the challenge was really clear, was develop that digital strategy that was going to bring us online up to the level that we had offline, demonstrate value add, and as Sam was saying, that's really quite difficult. We don't have that mass market approach. We're not kind of a numbers game. The other thing was do it quickly. One way that we did that is we built our website within 90 days after a huge amount of consultation. So being a smaller organization, we're quite nimble. Lots of consultation, but we could really get on with it.
Yeah. So we took to looking what could be achieved and kind of looked at the things that would be quite common and quite obvious in many ways in terms of what you look at when you're looking at B2B online and looking at the kind of things that it's going to help Lewis Silkin do. So that will be, yes, firstly, the brand promotion and bringing what was a strong offline brand online and making it as strong for the same reasons that it was strong offline. Supporting new business activity, client acquisition, growing the profile of teams and individuals. And this was the big takeout for us, and what was the groundwork for everything was actually the people within the organization were the most important, and when you're looking at a law firm, you're looking at the actual individual lawyers and the teams that are around them, because they're the people that are going to be doing your work on a day-to-day basis. So that's so important. So the more interaction and the more relationship we can get with an individual in the firm, be it a lawyer or secretary or otherwise, that is so important to have that relationship with the client rather than just being a brand out here, people over here. So that's something that we really focus on. Obviously, existing clients and growing accounts with existing clients is another key part in terms of the customer service strategy. And then for law firms, the other important things are recruitment and your external relations in terms of reputation, because obviously there's certain things that can damage your reputation fairly heavily, fairly quickly. So you've got to have plans in place there. So we went for this thing about transformation, and not just a redevelopment, but a transformation of everything that Lewis Silkin did, from the website through to social engagement, which played a big part in the strategy, and I'll touch on that a bit later. So we wanted to go from what was essentially a text-based website with some fairly dry lawyerish content, if I might say so, from that perspective, to something that was engaging, had rich media, had interactivity, had engagement, had things to do on the site, from just desktop access to something that was multi-device and multi-platform. This was really important to us as well. We took a very much a mobile-first approach. And if you can go inside and have a look on your various tablets and phones at the moment, and it's an adaptive layout, which is almost the most simplistic form of doing mobile, but is the most effective in these terms. We didn't need anything that was, again, we're not doing e-commerce online, so we didn't need something that was exact for every device, but it's perfect in the way that it slims down the navigation and brings the things that you need to the fore quickly and easily for those different devices. From one-size-fits-all content to content that adapts. Again, in this site, we we ended up using Sitecore, as you might have guessed, since we're here. But we use Sitecore, and we use the personalization engine in there to deliver relevant content to people at the relevant times. So if they express an interest in a specific sector, because there's a whole host of industries that you work in, a whole host of sectors, a whole host of services, if they express an interest in one of those services or sectors, then we could start giving the relevant information from the blog or from the social media that the partners were putting out, and actually start giving them targeted messaging. I thought I shouldn't have put this in here because I can't say the word, and equality of service, to personalized adaptive messaging, as I just said, from another face in the crowd to a rather more human law firm, and that was the key to it, trying to get that human approach across. And also wanted to stop waiting for people to arrive at the site and actually motivate people reaching out to them. That wasn't so much from an SEO perspective, but more from a social and content perspective. And content obviously is one of the things that is absolutely key now in any web development, and specifically with B2B. It's very easy to have a site become dry very quickly and very easily by having the same case studies and the same old content. So once you've been to the site once, you never come back again, there's no need. And so that was something that we focused on changing. The first port of call was developing a strategy. So before we did anything with opening Photoshop or getting out wireframes or anything else that we do, we just looked at the overall strategy. And that mainly focused around content and people. And often the people in the organization are the hardest to get on board and the hardest people to change. The technology is quite easy, the design's easy, the brand's easy to a certain extent. It's more about the people and getting them on board, because as people have said throughout today, it's actually about the whole business. It's not just one part of the business. It's not just Mark and his new business team. It's about every interaction they ever have with a client. Digital has to play a part of that somewhere. So the digital strategy, again, I've sort of mentioned this, but found the legal sector is founded on traditional service sort of principles. So that's credibility, expertise, and most of all, personal connections. And you see that through everything in a law firm, from the recruitment through to the client contacts and everything else. It's about those personal connections and personal reputations, really. So reputations and relationships became the cornerstone of everything that we did in terms of strategy. Every time we looked at design, or looked at the user experience, or looked at the technology, or looked at the way we're going to do personalization, that was founded in the reputation and relationships side of things. So that we had proactive engagement from all of the business. And again, I'll talk about that in a second, about how we actually went out and had to speak to people and set some guidelines up and some rules around what could and couldn't be done. And then we set up a strategy to measure that at the back end, which I'll show you a couple of stats and things later on. It was about coordinating the communications. So it wasn't just about the website. There was the newsletter, there was the blog, which is called The Journal, and then there was the social channels. And it was not so much about having Lewis Silkin as using the channel itself, but the individuals in that organization. So where for some companies, Facebook is a massive thing, in the B2B world, professional services world, quite often not that important. It's more about LinkedIn and about the networks that already exist and taking advantage of those rather than trying to reinvent something. And then what we did was map those certain tools, which are quite basic tools in many ways, but map them against the kind of objectives that we were looking at. So from a company people expertise side of things, we could showcase that through the website and the case studies. And from a personality side of things, we looked at the blog and the type of things people were talking about on a daily basis. In terms of relationship building, personalized content, reaching out to people, we looked at the newsletter and what we were doing there. And the community, and the sort of community services side of things was very much focused around the social channels and pre-existing social channels. So rather than trying to create our own My Lewis Silkin, we looked at using and taking advantage of what was already there in LinkedIn and Twitter and others. And then other content repositories to support SEO and to really get our content out to a wider audience as possible. That's things like SlideShare and YouTube. And the important thing is there's nothing here that's actually massively radical or innovative, but it's actually about making sure they're all working in tandem and that we're consistent across everything we do, and the message is always the same. So whether you land on the website or you go to the LinkedIn profile or you're on YouTube or SlideShare, the feel of Lewis Silkin and what that brand encapsulates and what it would be like to go and work with the firm, work for the firm, or have them as your law firm would be exactly the same kind of feeling, and you get a bit of that personality shining through. From a relationship point of view, requires a conversational approach, and the CRM side of things is not just about a piece of technology. We're looking at this at the moment in terms of how we bring in further the CRM and some of the email side of things, but it's not just about technology. It requires a change in approach, change of the way of thinking, the change of the way you view a customer, and people have talked again today a lot of time about the lifetime value of a customer. So that's what this focuses on, that building relationship side of things. And it's really for us about that personality and about the personal relationships. Digital is just a channel that we happen to be using. It's actually about those personal relationships, getting people closer. And Mark's going to tell us some anecdotes shortly about some of the ways that it's helped, rather than the sort of facts and figures, but actually some of the anecdotal evidence about how the relationships are being formed with the digital channels. In terms of Sitecore, as I said, Sitecores allows us to personalize the content and target different clients with different interests. There's no point in talking to someone that's in the media sector about our construction services or, and vice versa. So to be able to do that, and yes, it's not using the full power of the DMS, but it's starting to use bits that are just relevant in a B2B context and make that individual visit that little bit more relevant. So that's really important. So we use Sitecore to develop the corporate site, to deliver the blog and the kind of tools within there. We incorporate a lot of social media content. So some of the small but very nice personalization touches are just, once you've expressed an interest in a certain sector by browsing that content, the tweets and the blog posts that come up in the featured articles are relevant to that sector. And furthermore, those tweets and those blogs are not company tweets and blogs, but they're actually from individuals who happen to work in the team that you're interested in. So it becomes a lot more personal, so you start to know the individuals involved. And phase 2, we're considering how we tie in the email marketing capability much tighter and much further with the CRM. It's quite a big job. There's a lot of clients, a lot of work on the segmentation, so it takes a fair bit of planning. So we're going through that stage at the moment to try and really tie everything together for, and reach that nirvana kind of point. The other important thing for us was the measurement of this. So setting up objectives and KPIs at the start. As I said, there were some broad brush things in terms of supporting new business, growing reputation, growing the influence that we had online in terms of social mentions, search rankings and everything else. But the main one was the facilitating the client relationships. And really we could only get that back anecdotally rather than being something that's really firm and we could grasp it with an exact number or an exact number of sales or anything else. So we used web analytics, tracking interactions as well as page views. We'll talk about some of the numbers in a second. Social tracking the reach of social activity, which has been massively increased and helped across the business in terms of both new business and in terms of recruitment. And then the CRM to capture individual interactions with clients and how that works as well. The other bits that we did were slightly different with Lewis Silkin. And this is the thing about the transformation when we talk about the people being the most difficult part of to change, really, not the technology is an easy part. We built the journal, which is essentially the blog for everybody, for every individual in the company. And that was to encourage the profession to engage, to comment, to debate, to argue, and to actually facilitate some conversation around the topics, because quite often people want to discuss these topics and they've all got an opinion, and obviously the law changes constantly. And so there's always new, fresh content, and that just keeps the site very fresh. And we also ran a social media roadshow and went in and explained the basics of Twitter. Some people were very engaged and they knew how to use Twitter, they knew how to blog, or already had their own personal blog, so it was an easy transition. For some people it was very new and very kind of brave new world side of things, and for those people it's about reassurance and giving some basic guidelines. Many people are scared within organizations, especially B2B, to use their own personal Twitter or LinkedIn profile to promote the organization, because they don't want to say the wrong thing, essentially. I mean, we have a rule.
There was a lot of debate around that, as you can imagine, and we had a variety of partners saying, we're fine to use Twitter, but I don't want any personal content. And so that's kind of one of the purposes of Twitter. And also it's very much about, we describe ourselves as a rather more human law firm, so somebody on Twitter not having their personality coming through, you're kind of missing a trick. So we kind of just got on with it, and a year later we said, look, you were concerned about this, no issues.
Yeah, and we have the same rule as us as an agency as well. People often ask, what can I and can't I say on Twitter. There's obviously the client confidentiality side of things, but most often we say if you wouldn't say it down the pub to somebody, don't say on Twitter, otherwise you're quite free to have your own personality. I think that was the same kind of
very, very light touch approach to kind of governance. So we don't have pages and pages of thou shalt not, thou shalt do this. It was kind of be sensible guys, you're lawyers, you advise people on this, you know what you're doing.
Yeah. And so, yeah, in terms of the government side of things, it's staff need their own content, and as Mark said, it's not censoring them overly much and allowing to have a bit of flexibility. And it does take a bit of, it is brave sometimes to go into that approach, but if you can do it, it really does help in terms of those relationship side of things. And the other thing was having the social media champions. So it's true that people follow individuals more than they do organisations or teams of people. You really want to hear what that one individual's got to say. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can go wrong, but in the majority of the time it really does help to bring out personality and make you feel closer to that organisation, even if it's through one individual. So the path to enlightenment. The analytics show real improvement, and although the number of visits to the site is not hugely increased, it's actually about the engagement side of things. Bounce rates, for example, have gone down from 60% to 25%. Okay, it's only one measure, but it actually shows that people are taking a second to not just go, when they're looking at a long list or a short list for a law firm, they're not just coming onto the site, going away because they just had no interest whatsoever. It's engaging people, and often in the B2B context, that's the first step, is actually taking that initial engagement that you get onto the long list, and then it's about the rest of your sales process to take that through. In addition to that, the mobile use on the site has increased massively, partly because of mostly because of the trends in mobile and tablet and everything else. But what it did was vindicated the mobile first approach and the way we did that. So it's been ready for that from day one, and it doesn't cause a lot more hassle for Mark and his team internally in terms of having to manage multiple sites and multiple mobile sites or not having one at all. So it's a very kind of simplistic, but it works effectively. So yeah, Mark, I'm going to let Mark talk through a few of the sort of more anecdotal stories that he's got around the success of the site.
Yeah, we've already said it's quite difficult to measure. It's like is it Ford said, I know which 50% of our marketing works and the other 50% doesn't, which 50%. But we think we're getting it right. We're getting lots of anecdotal client comments approaching us to do work and say, I was looking for a law firm, your website looked different, your tone of voice was different, your presence, your digital presence was different. One really good example, we have to pitch the new business, like I'm sure everybody does in the audience. We were pitching recently to a client. There were 5 law firms pitching. The way that we work is a partner would lead our pitch. We didn't win the work, but there were other factors at play, rather than bore you with all details. But afterwards, I always go and talk to clients about our pitches to understand what worked, what could we have done differently, why did they appoint who they appointed. And one question, one thing for us, as we've already said, is relationships are key. So I always ask about the relationship that the team and the partner have built with the prospective client. And the general counsel that I went to see said, oh, Joe Farmer, your partner, out of all the law firms, I felt she built the best relationship with me from any firm and any partner that I was dealing with. And he was talking up to a certain point in the pitch. Now, up until that point, he hadn't met her. It was on LinkedIn, it was on Twitter, it was via the website. So it was all digital presence. So he actually hadn't met face-to-face. And that, to me, was kind of, I use this war story, as you can imagine, loads and loads. Because that, to me, is probably the extreme of where we're going. But it just shows that getting it right in the digital space is critical for us.
So in terms of how we reach Nirvana, I think me and Mark were discussing this, and obviously it's one of those things that you're always moving forward. There's always something else coming along, and if you're never going to get to a point where you stop because things change so quickly, but much closer than before in terms of the way things work and the amount of people at play in the organisation. And I think personally what Lewis Silkin has done well is engage the whole organisation, and that's the hardest thing to do. It's, as I said before, it's the people that cause the most problem in terms of actually making some positive change. As Mark pointed out to us, that other people are adopting similar techniques and technologies and Sitecore and everything else, so we need to stay ahead of the game, and that's our role now as well, to help Lewis Silkin stay ahead of the game and stay ahead of the curve and take advantage of new technologies where appropriate. And like we say, there's more to do. It's a marathon more than a sprint, but certainly in a much better place than we were a couple of years ago. So thank you very much indeed, and if there's any questions, we can...